We now move into a high-impact panel discussion about vision to value, embedding AI into boardroom strategy. This session dives into how AI can move beyond buzzwords and shape enterprise strategy at the highest level, from vision to measurable business value. We're joined by an exceptional panel. Professor Andy Neely is the founder of Bleeta.ai and co-founder of Anmut, a global authority on performance management and digital transformation. Andy brings deep academic and industry insight. Shailesh Kumar, a pioneer in applied AI, with leadership roles at Google and Reliance Jio. Now Dean at Geo Institute, he has scaled AI solutions across sectors and knows what it really takes to deliver impact at scale. Moderating the session is Nikhil Mahen, Chief AI Officer at Network Science. A strategic advisor to CXOs, Nikhil specializes in transforming enterprises with AI-led value creation and has led some of the most forward-thinking innovation programs globally. Over to you, Nikhil.
Thank you so much. I think that was a very interesting start. Needless to say, that was an AI itself. So, very fine. So, I'm very looking forward to this talk, right? So, the industry is at this moment where every CEO is being told that they need an AI strategy. Very few are being guided on what that really means. And the pressure to adopt any kind of strategy is intense. On one side, you have the boardrooms that are demanding AI being adopted faster and more innovation. And then you have the investors that demand a clear return. And the headlines are making it feel like they're either building with AI or you're being left behind by it. So there's a very clear paradox that we are stuck in, where the technology is moving really fast, but our understanding of how to lead with it hasn't really kept pace. So that's why this conversation is so important. And I don't really need to give much of an intro for Professor Neely and Professor Kumar. They're two stalwarts of the field. But while the disciplines might differ slightly, both challenge us to think not just in terms of tools, but in terms of transformation itself. So with that, let me begin for a question for Professor Kumar. I'd like to, in your experience in working with leadership, and you work with leadership across the board, India, US, even global, what is the single biggest misconception that CEOs still hold about AI adoption?
Yeah, thank you, Nikhil, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So, these are very interesting times. We have gone through our first digital transformation called the ITification of our industries. And now we are going through the second digital transformation, and we'll call it the AIification of our industries. And like digital transformation 1.0, there was a lot of confusion. There's a lot more confusion now in the second digital transformation, right? If I ask 20 people in a room, what is AI? They all have a different answer. It's a very new field. It is evolving very fast. Every time you read a new McKinsey report or a new blog or a new Coursera course, your idea of AI is evolving very quickly. And we are, struggling how to AIfy our data-rich enterprises into AI-first enterprises, right? So there is a real direction and journey we have to take, but there is a lot of confusion about how to take it, right? AI strategies have not led to AI platforms. Use cases have not led to platforms. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Please go on.
So the problem is that because of these, we are now, solving AI in a very bottom-up way, right? So for example, if you are running a complex ecosystem like a retail industry or a manufacturing industry or a insurance company, these are very complex systems. They are made up of many workflows, many models, many layers of decisions and metrics. To build something like that in a bottom-up fashion, piecemeal approach, one-point solution at a time, and trying to stitch it all together is the current CIO strategy. And I call it the digital slum in the backyard, because there is operating system mindset for retail, for telecom. What we are doing is we are building one component at a time from one vendor at a time. And we have created a large mess, if you will, in the backend. And now we are trying to say, how do we AIfy in a very integrated, systematic fashion, as opposed to having done 50 POCs with 50 different vendors. It's not leading to a full AIfication of my company.
Mhm.
Is there a new strategy that we have to adopt? So that is one reason. So one transformation I want to, I talk about is a top-down thinking of AI, an AI first mindset. AI is not an afterthought that I have built IT for the last 20 years. Let me add AI on top. We don't add AI on
Mm.
top of it. We build it from first principles all over again, what an AI first company looks like. And this is a mindset shift in the leadership first, and then it becomes, it goes to the next layer and the next layer. So it's not an easy transformation journey. It's very confusing. Nobody has figured it out yet. But
Mhm.
obviously, we keep running after the second big problem is inertia, right? A lot of times
Mhm.
our companies are not willing to transform, right? Things are going well. Why do you want to? Why should I learn something else? Oh, but it will take away my job. Then, should I really adopt it, right? So there's a lot of inertia in the companies is one reason why we are not AI fine. There's a lot of confusion from the top down. What is a strategy? What is a platform? We are not able to do that. And obviously the skills and the talent landscape is also very random, right? Like you have executive education programs, bottom-up upskilling programs. All that is still, happening in a very, theoretical way, right? So the idea is how does it all come together is the key question, and that's what this discussion will explore some of those questions.
Fantastic. Well, Professor Andy, same question to you, and this I wanted to come from the perspective of your expertise in the manufacturing industry, right? Uh, in many reports that we find manufacturing industries tend to be one of the earlier ones to adopt AI. Is it easier for them to take the platform approach that Professor is talking about, do a ground up build because their IT infrastructure is limited, or there are other factors to this as well? And while this is happening, do they have any misconceptions about what to do, and are they following the same trends as the rest of the industries?
Great question. Well, thanks for inviting me as well. I'm also delighted to be here, and it's a really nice panel to be on. So let me just step back slightly from manufacturing, Hill, and just think
Yeah.
generally. So one of the things I've been doing recently is a lot of board briefings about AI and the implications for organizations, and just helping them think about what it might mean for their organization. And I think what one of the misconceptions I see is there's a sort of narrative in general world and in the newspaper and in the media and so on, which basically makes people feel like they are falling behind if they're not already fully adopted AI. The reality is, and Professor Shailesh sort of alluded to this, actually, it's relatively rare that companies have fully adopted AI, and lots of people are experimenting with bits of it. So I think one of the big misconceptions is this kind of fear of, oh my God, we're miles behind, we're playing catch up. Having
Right.
said that, when you look at where the technology is, and this is one of the things I talk to boards about, where the technology is today and what it can do versus the way that many organizations are using it, there's arguably a growing gap. And there's a famous
Oh,
quote that says, lots of organizations, even if we stop developing the technology today and said, right, pause development of AI, most organizations are still 10 years behind the kind of forefront of the technology. So there's a long way to go for lots of organizations. In terms of where it's most successful, I mean, I tend to think about three phases. Manufacturing is interesting because it's gone through lots of digital transformation over the years. And clearly, one of the things you've got to get right is your sort of data foundations in organizations. We might come back to data later on. But the three sort of building blocks I would say about, I think the first thing for me is really understanding what's going on in AI, what the capability of the technology is. It's almost a kind of awareness raising experimentation piece. And when I was in my last role, busy executive job helping run Cambridge University, I played a bit with AI, but I had no real time to go into depth about what it might mean for the organization. I've now had some time, and that's allowed me to think I would now approach how I was doing my previous role very differently, knowing what I know. But you need to have time to experiment and soak up what AI can do. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is then building some examples inside your organization. And here I think the use cases, sort of proof of concept, is helpful, because you start to just demonstrate what AI can do and how it can help you automate some processes. But then I think where the real value will come is the third phase, which is once you've built the confidence, you understand what AI is doing, you've demonstrated a bit of application, it's actually reimagining the business and going, right, how would we run this organization in a world where we were adopting AI first? And if you want to see the most extreme versions of that, you just need to look at the startup community and think about, firms that were born in the last couple of years, fundamentally set up different workflows and processes, partly because the technology is there and they can build on those foundations. If you've been running for 60 years or 100 years, you've got a lot of legacy and you've got a lot of that inertia, as has already been mentioned, is really tough to overcome. And so you've really got to build your capability and understanding and confidence before you start to go and reimagine the business.
Amazing. Just to stay on this point, I have a follow-up. You seem to echo Professor Shailesh's platform approach a little bit, but you're talking about reimagining of the businesses. So at some level, I completely agree with you. In many ways, it is easier for someone to start a traditional business completely reimagined versus somebody who already has legacy systems built within. The inertia to change is very high. However, the ecosystems to support that new business is also going to be weaker because that ecosystem exists built with the legacy system in mind. So how does one get around that? Do you have the endpoints the way you build the endpoints the way legacy system endpoints were, or the other way around?
I would go the other way around. I mean, this is all about how you scale the business, basically. And so if you're an early stage business if you're a startup being created now, you absolutely want to adopt the best technologies that you can in terms of AI. And you will, if you are successfully growing, you'll either pull organizations with you or you'll find other startups that help you scale, basically. I think trying to build on the legacy and traditional infrastructure will just constrain the AI based business. And so I think I think there will be one of the big societal questions for me around AI actually is the disruption that's coming to legacy organizations, what that means in terms of jobs and roles for people. And I struggle to think of an industry or a sector where you look and think actually AI could fundamentally change the way we do those things. I think arguably this is a bigger transformation in terms of technology for me than the internet, and will be more impactful than the Industrial Revolution was.
Yes, Professor.
Andy used the word reimagine. It's a very important word. It is beyond disruption. We are not talking about change, transformation, disruption. We're talking about reimagination. It's a very different word. People don't get the depth of it. So let me give some examples, right? What does reimagination really mean is, imagine if your business or your pre-digital business, banking, insurance, all those, were born today. How would they look like? That is reimagination, right? So for one example that I use all the time is, imagine you are buying a chair. How do you do it in a pre-digital era versus a post-digital era? In the pre-digital era, you go on shopping, you sit on chairs, you try them and all that. What happens in a reimagined world? How do you buy a chair is, you go to ChatGPT, you design a chair perfectly for yourself. And instead of pushing the buy button because that chair doesn't exist, you push a print button and 3D printer is going to print a chair. That is reimagining how to buy a chair. Now let me reimagine how to do agriculture. Imagine a drone is roaming around the village and getting all the data from all the crops and sending that information to another drone, which does fertilizer, and that drone does the whole thing. And then another drone does pesticide. Now we have reimagined how agriculture should be done. But if we just transform carry the baggage of the past, train more tech teachers in BEd, put more, labor on the ground. If we just keep doing that, right? Like what Ford said, right? If I ask my customers, they would ask for a faster horse. So the problem is
Right.
people who have gotten used to of running a business in a certain way, right, will never be able to reimagine how can it be done differently. The guy who runs a bullock cart cannot imagine a car. And one of our bigger problems is we expect our current people who are used to of running a business in a certain way to reimagine how to do it differently. We need a different group of people. We need an outside force, the first law of motion. In order to bring change, you need an outside force, maybe a startup, maybe some other consultants who can sit down and reimagine from scratch how your business would look like, right? So that is the key word of the day, reimagine. And what does that mean in the new world? We have to think about it deeply.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for that, Professor. So this leads me to where we are today, right? CEOs still have mandates. There are only so many outside forces, and a lot of the outside forces, sorry to say, is a lot of noise, a lot of misinformation about AI itself. So they still have to tie AI to their real business goal, not just for tech's sake, but to actually adopt. Plus, there is this extra fear that, oh, AI is changing. About if I adopt something now, and you have something new comes about, something even better comes about. How do CEOs make decisions in this very, very confusing environment about adoption itself? In this situation, people have decided that adoption has to happen, but there is decision paralysis. There's this paradox of choice, and the choices keep evolving. How do they get around this? Professor Neely.
So I think this is it's a really interesting challenge. I was actually with a board recently and talking to them about their AI strategy, and we were discussing the relative pros and cons of different large language models. And I was saying, given where they were and given the current capabilities, I was recommending a particular model for them. And then I said to them, but you have to bear in mind this might change. And I went home and looked at an announcement that afternoon from one of the large companies, which actually made me go, hang on, if I was doing this same discussion with the board tomorrow, I would have recommended a slightly different, I would have recommended a different solution to them. So it really is moving quickly. I think the consequence of that is twofold. One, that you've got to build systems which don't lock you in. You've got to build flexibility into your system at this point while the turmoil is happening and while the changes are going on. You can't afford just to wait until it's all settled down, because you will be left behind. But equally, you have to be really careful to build in the flexibility not to get locked into a particular solution. And there are ways of doing that with the models and so on, so you can replace different models. The second thing I would say is there's a lovely piece of work that Kathleen Eisenhart did on strategy, and the paper she wrote is called "Strategy as Simple Rules," and the argument is that in highly uncertain and complex and fast-moving environments, it's really not sensible to try and define an all-encompassing detailed strategy, but you're much better off defining a relatively straightforward set of simple rules that provide guidance, if you like. It's a set of a box that you're operating in. And as long as you're operating inside that box, it's fine. And if you step outside that box, it's not fine. And of course, if you've got strategy of simple rules, it's relatively easy as the world moves on to change the simple rules to take account of new direction. So for me, the speed question, the strategy of simple rules, and then thinking really carefully about how do we build systems that have inherent flexibility is absolutely fundamental. There's sort of three fundamental principles I would think about now.
That's fantastic. Professor, let me get a little bit technical here. I know this is supposed to be for CEOs, but I love talking tech with you. So Andy just spoke about building in flexibility within the system. With LLMs, it's relatively simple. You can swap an LLM in and out. You can have a different API key. But where you have machine learning models, where you have more complex, say, CNN networks, right? and you needed a new thing to come in, it's a long lead time. And then companies will start thinking about tech debt. I mean, it's funny, they should be thinking about industrial debt that already exists, but they will start looking at that in isolation. How do they then build a technology strategy, or at least from a CEO's perspective, start thinking about the tech? So this is going to last for so long, and this is how the change is going to happen. At least from a strategic perspective, how would you approach this?
Yeah, so let's look at the problem of the digital slums all over again. Why are we where we are, right? In a complex system, we have acquired point solutions. We have not built a operating system for retail, operating system for insurance, operating system for banking. What have we done? We have acquired point solutions, right, from different vendors. And the real problem now is interoperability. Interoperability, one vendor solution doesn't work with another vendor solution. So if I have to run my business using a collection of point solutions and a bunch of people downloading Excel, emailing Excel, uploading Excel, and running, that is not working. So we don't have a platform or a strategy at a top-down company level. That is the real problem to be addressed. Now, agentic is one way to solve it, and there are other ways to solve it, and we'll talk about agentic versus not. But the idea is, like Satya Nadella said, SaaS is dead. But what I propose is operating system as a service, not software as a service. So the idea is, at the top-down level, we have to take an operating system mindset to every domain. Let me take an example of electricity. If you look at electrification of the world today, it is a very mature system, right? Now, imagine if I were to do this in a bottom-up fashion. If I ask somebody to invent the bulbs, somebody to invent fans, somebody to invent sockets, somebody to invent wires, if I was doing it bottom-up and there is no interoperability, there is no standardization, there is no configurability, right? The principles Andy talked about. Without those principles and without doing it in a top-down manner, we will not achieve electricity level maturity in any field. 4G, 5G, we did not start building components. We designed the operating system first, the protocols, the 4G, 5G protocols. Then anybody can implement the protocol. So what is missing is a banking operating system protocol. What are all the workflows in banking? What are all the decisions a banking takes? What are all the metrics in banking? What are all the features we need to do? What are all the sensors and data we collect? Without a proper design, just adding one point solution after another and hoping that it will work together is not happening. So the real problem we have to do is start thinking top down, build an operating system for our domain, and kind of boil the ocean systematically. We have to boil the ocean, but systematically. We have to design the whole and build the parts with the whole in mind. And that is otherwise, how does a city planner plans a city and it gets built over 100 years, right? How do we plan that internet and it gets built over 20 years? So the idea is we should come up with an AI plus IT architecture of our domain. And the reason it is not happening, I'll tell you, is that we have one group of people in our companies who are digital thinkers, right? They are the data science, the data engineers, AI and IT people. These are what I call the digital people in the organization. And then we have the domain people in the organization, right? The operating officers, the CHROs, the finance guys, the HR guys, and all that. The problem is these two groups of people, the digital people and the domain people, don't know how to talk to each other anymore. And if you recognize this problem, then we have a framework that, we have worked with network science to create a framework where we say, this is how we first talk to the domain people, extract their domain knowledge because they know what to do and digital people know how to do. And unless somebody bridges that gap, transformation will not happen. And that is what I have learned from talking to the CIO organizations and talking to the COO organizations in many companies, that this bridging of the gap is not happening. And therefore, we need a framework. So what I'm saying is there is hope. There is a systematic process. that we can follow to actually do digital transformation by bringing these two groups of people together in a systematic manner. One group of people tells me what are the workflows. The other group of people looks at those workflows and design systems. And now we have workflows and systems working together to create an operating system. And we can repeat this process across different domains.
Right. Now, yes, please.
If I just building on that, because I think, and going back to your earlier question about manufacturing, arguably lots of manufacturing firms have been through a process over the years of thinking about their processes, thinking about lean manufacturing, fundamentally I think that was re-engineering rather than reimagining, but re-engineering the way they did things. And they had to bring those different groups together. And so you had to have people who understood digital and understood processes and how flows worked. And I think that's a really important set of skills. The other one that I would add, I think there are some no regrets moves for organizations as well in the age of AI. So one of the no regrets moves actually is about the data. It's about getting a real grip on your organization's data. And the models are only going to be as good as the data that we put into them, basically. And yet far too often, organizations don't have a great grip on their data. They don't understand the underlying quality of the data. They don't understand where all the data is. As mentioned, it's sitting in some cases, different spreadsheets around the organization. You've got duplication of data. I mean, it's just a complete mess in many organizations. And so I think understanding really deeply the state of the condition of your data, where it sits, and indeed some are now trying to work on the value of data. How do you actually put a financial value on data? And if you thought about that as different data assets, and you could start to say, well, relatively speaking, my customer data is worth more to me. It allows me to make more important decisions than my inventory level data or my supply chain data. Then you'd start to say, well, if that's the case, I want to invest more, particularly if my customer data is not in great condition. That's a higher return investment, so I can start to prioritize my data investments. Because in many organizations, you've got loads of people coming to you saying, we've got a great data project we need to do. We need to improve our digital infrastructure over here. How do you prioritize between them unless you know which of those data assets potentially are most valuable to the organization? Now, it seems to me that's a no regrets move. Regardless of how the technology moves, we're all going to need to sort out the foundations, and the foundations fundamentally are around data.
That's amazing. Do you have any examples of companies who have actually successfully done this, or any small use situations where this has happened?
Yeah, so one of the ones that often gets talked about in the UK is National Highways. So National Highways runs the road network in the UK, basically owns the road network, all the major roads, so the motorways and so on. And for years, National Highways have thought of themselves as an organization that manages physical assets. They manage roads. One of the companies I'm involved in does some work with National Highways where we've been valuing their data assets. And what National Highways now are on the record saying is that they would value their data at about half of the physical asset value inside the organization. And the way we get to that figure is we think about what are the decisions the data allows different stakeholders to take, and in turn creates value for different stakeholders. So there's a sort of structured methodology for getting a value on the data. The interesting cultural change that gives inside the organization is people then start to say, well, hang on, if data is worth half of our physical asset value, then maybe for every couple of hours we're spending talking about roads and tarmac, we should be spending an hour talking about data. Now, it's not quite as simple as that, but you get the point. It just elevates the importance of the data infrastructure inside the organization. And I think that's in turn has led to other conversations about how you might use data to optimize traffic flow along roads rather than investing in building more roads and so on. So that's one. The National Highways example is a really good one to look at.
That's an astonishing example. So for Professor Shailesh, you work with some of the biggest companies, at least in India, if not the world. How do they look at data? Because thank you for the segue, Professor Neely. Data is one big part, especially from a CEO. They care about it a lot. The tech guys, the CTOs and the CIOs, they will look at data as, oh, it's an asset for me to keep. or to store or a bunch of sensors to collect it from the CEO's perspective, it allows me to make decisions. In the world of AI, has the perception of what people can do with data changed for Professor Shailesh, or is it still the same and people are figuring out what to do?
Yeah. So, there are pre-digital companies and post-digital companies, and
Mhm.
post-digital companies like Google, YouTube, all these, they are very, very mature about their data. They have thought about it a lot.
Right.
But the pre-digital companies have not. And that's where
Mhm.
the journey is, right? It starts from data. Now, let me give you some example of the data strategy is not a data strategy independent of an AI strategy. Unless you have
Okay.
an AI strategy, you cannot have a data strategy. So let me give 3 examples. So if you are a software engineer, for you, data means I need to collect the logs to debug my software. For a software engineer, data means that. For a business analyst, data means I need to generate dashboards. Therefore, I need data for that. For
Right.
data scientists, data means completely different. For a microservices architecture guy, a customer data has to be siloed into 20 microservices, different columns in different microservices, because that's the nature of how they see data. But for a data scientist, I want to see the customer data together across all the columns to get a holistic view of
Right.
the customer. So you see, data strategy is a function of AI strategy. Data
Okay.
strategy cannot be finished and then start AI strategy. It has to be worked backwards, right? I'll give you a very
Okay.
simple example of 2 mindsets of data. Imagine I'm running a campaign manager built by Adobe, and I'm sending a campaign coupon to you. And if I only put campaign ID in the link,
Mhm.
because my goal is to count how many people clicked on it, then I'll only put campaign ID in my thing and I'll log that. And I'm able to count
Correct.
how many people clicked on it. This is the dashboard mindset. This is measuring for payment of money. But
Yeah.
AI mindset is, I will not only send you the campaign ID, I'll also put the customer ID in it. Together is the link. Now, when you click on it, I will know who clicked and who did not click. That is
Okay.
an AI mindset. So the idea is, if you have an old mindset where you were not collecting data at a customer level, but at an aggregate level, if your purpose was to only build dashboards, how many versus who, you will never change your data strategy. So for
Got it.
data strategy should be built by a data scientist, not by a business analyst, not by a data engineer, because data scientist is the most important consumer of data. And with that, you build a new data strategy. And this is the struggle I have seen, right? Data teams are different, AI teams are
Yeah.
different, and they build some data layers AI teams are not able to use. And then there's a
Right.
constant struggle between them. So not only clean data, but design patterns for AI are different, design patterns for dashboarding are different. So, and we constantly confuse that we are building dashboard, therefore we are an AI company. No, building dashboards does not make you an AI company, period, right? And this transformation in our thought process has not happened because we've invested in Power BI and all of those tools. I have never found a dashboard useful at all to do any transformation of the organization, right? So there's a
Mhm.
different mindset, and unless CEOs understand the difference between ITification, datafication, and AIification, and why AIification should drive everything backwards, then this
Mhm.
transformation is not easy.
Excellent. So just to follow up on that, I know companies like Google, they capture thousands and thousands of different metrics. Forget the amount of data points that they're capturing, right? Well, on me, I'm certain they'll have over 1 billion data points. So there'll also be a long tail of data that's not really very useful, and there is a cost to that data, especially for smaller companies. How do they optimize that? Or what data to capture and what to let go of?
So I think that for me is where some of the data valuation piece comes in. So actually, if you
Okay.
think about the data so take a university example. As I mentioned, used to be the vice president of Cambridge University. We've got data on students, we've got data on staff, we've got data on research grants we hold, we've got data on alumni. There's loads and loads of different, you can think of those as individual data assets. And the question that you need to ask yourself is which of those data assets, either individually or combined, are most valuable to the organization. And if you had some sense then of the prioritization of the relative value of those data assets, the second question you need to ask yourself is around the data condition. What state are those different data assets in? And then imagine a 2x2, y-axis is value, data value, x-axis is data condition. Clearly stuff that's in the top left, so very high value but low quality, low data condition, that's where you want to start your investment and your prioritization, basically. And so I think that exercise for organizations is really quite valuable. Initially, just identifying, people talk about data lakes, but I don't think data lakes are very interesting. It's not a very valuable concept. Just chuck all the data into this great big lake and then we can do something with it. I think a much better analogy in a way is data pools. And if you think of these different little pools of data, if I understand the value and the condition of each of those pools, and then I can work out which ones I really want to work on and invest in, that is potentially a much more productive strategy for me.
Right. Value your data. I think that's a wonderful insight. This leads me to another point about distrust in AI because the data itself not being clean and fair and trusted, right? So it might be because of disparate systems, but it's a lot of noise on what you can do with the data in AI. In the sense, how do you keep it clean for AI? From a CEO's perspective, I know a lot of it is a CTO's job, but from a CEO's perspective, what can they do to ensure that their decision making is as clean as possible to maintain data efficacy, or for at least the data that they are receiving?
Right. So, I talk about different levels of an enterprise maturity. One of them is data maturity. One of them is decision maturity. One of them is metric maturity. One of them is automation maturity. One of them is intelligence maturity. And finally, integration maturity. There are 6 layers of maturity, and data layer is the maturity is the foundation of that. And I think I'll give you an example of how organizations decide the cost versus benefit of data, right? So imagine that you've been collecting alarms data for your manufacturing unit or whatever, and you decide that minor alarms are not important, only critical alarms are important. And I'm only going to save them because I have a cost of storing long tail of minor alarms. Now, if you take that decision 5 years, 10 years ago, and you've been not using it, 10 years later, somebody comes and says, oh, you know what? Minor alarms in the past are predictors of major alarms in the future and critical alarms in the future. Where are my minor alarms in the past, which I can use to build a model? And then suddenly there are no minor alarms because we decided not to save them. You see? So the first thought we should have is never decide too early to let go of any data. All data is first principle. My data is not the only data. Outside data is also important. Census data, data, maps data, all of that is also important. Third, data is not only what I ingest, but also what I create internally. So if I create a feature store for every customer and say, you like blue shirts, you like Arrow brand and all that, that is also data. If I generate inferences of AI models and say, what is the churn score of a customer on week 1, week 2, week 3? It's internally generated data. That is also data. If I made decisions of certain campaigns, certain store layout, certain pricing, decisions are also data. I need to store them. Why do I need to store decisions? Because tomorrow I want to build an AI first organization where good decisions, bad decisions, I need to store them so that I can learn from my bad decisions to improve the decisions. All the metrics I'm computing is also data. And I need to store all of them. I don't need to show them to somebody on a dashboard on one day and then remove all the metrics. I need metrics historical. So the idea is data maturity is a very broad theme. And what is data, how to store it, how to clean it, all that matters, right? And let me give one example. Imagine you are building a Byju's kind of an app, right? Which is all that. Data thinking, sensor thinking from an AI perspective is, if a kid is watching a video and the device is watching a kid, can the device figure out that the kid is confused while he's watching a particular video? Now, this idea will not come to a purely IT guy, to a purely content company. Only an AI company will think that feedback, live implicit feedback is also very important. So AI thinking requires us to build sensors, not just applications and products. And this kind of thought process is a very mature thought process. We need to take data maturity in a very, very serious way. It's a huge topic, right? And today we are only doing 5% of what needs to be done because it was done by software engineers, by business analysts, never done by data scientists. Therefore, the value of data to those people is very low compared to the value of data to a data scientist, right? And so therefore, my request is bring the data scientist on the table on day one, not on 3 years later, because by the time you bring him in and he will ask for the minor alarms, you were not captured. He will ask for customer ID along with campaign ID, you were not captured. So you've lost 3 years of real data, which could have been used to improve your business because you brought a data scientist after you thought, let me first build the app, run the business, get the money, get the customer, scale, then I will bring an AI guy. That is the biggest mistake. Today's world, AI guy should be the first person you hire, because if your journey is towards an AI first company, you have to have AI first mindset, which is not coming from a database guy or a process guy alone, right?
Right.
That is one of the mistakes we do. We think we'll add AI later. That is the biggest mistake. And therefore, we build everything in a non-AI first manner and then try to patch up AI. Then there is no data worth using later. So therefore, my request is bring your AI people early on, expose them to the operations, the ground realities of everything, and then ask them to AIify your organization.
Fantastic.
Can I just,
Professor Neely.
Sorry, just
Yes,
just building on that. I mean, I think I agree with absolutely with involving AI guys first. I thought the other bit that you were going to raise with your question about data and bias, though, is the underlying training data, particularly for some of the large language models. And I think that, I mean, they're not all explicit about where their data comes from, but it is some combination of scraping Facebook and Reddit and generally social media. But that gives us we know that gives a small subset of views of the world. I wrote a blog about this recently, and was basically, raising the question that arguably one of the dirty secrets in the AI world is that the underlying data that the models are trained on is not completely, but very influenced by a kind of US view of how the world should operate and run. And if you look at other parts of the world, South Africa, Africa generally, Asia, where there's not, if stuff is published not in English as the first language, India and so on, there are vast swathes of the world that are actually underrepresented in some of the underlying data. And so, as well as the AI person, I think it's really important to have the sort of social scientist who pokes questions about the data from a kind of ethical perspective and says, what are some of the inherent biases in here? Now, arguably, I also sent out a blog recently about where I'd asked one of the large language models to generate for me an image of a doctor and a nurse. And I got back a picture of a white male doctor and a white female nurse. Now, it was not meant to be a scientific experiment. Clearly, you would run it a lot more times if you wanted to really understand biases in the model. But the blog was saying, oh, isn't it interesting? That's what you get back immediately. And then some people did run it a few more times and got similar images back. And then there was a really interesting debate. So about half the people in the comments said, well, what do you expect? That just the images you got reflect the makeup of society and its biases in existing society. that are just being reflected in the model, and we have to correct the biases in existing society, and then the data will improve. And the other half, the
Right.
people, no, it's not acceptable. We shouldn't use AI, and particularly large language models, to reinforce biases that exist in society. And we need to think much more carefully about how we use some of these models. And so I think the AI team is really important, but I would also have the sort of social scientist, human side of this pushing as well, because I think you end up with a much better design then. And ultimately, we're making design choices now. These systems that we're building will shape the future of the world that we live in. And we are designing the future of that world. And so we need to make those decisions really very deliberately.
Amazing. Bringing the two thoughts that we had. One, the new systems of the world, and something that Professor Shailesh spoke about right at the beginning, which is the operating system thinking. If you had to, now going back to the old question, that if you have to redesign the traditional businesses again, Professor talked about redesigning buying a chair. Now, bigger businesses are more complicated than that. And new CEOs now have to still go into traditional businesses. They still have to be welders. You still need people making machines. You still need people doing logistics, right? If you have to, and these businesses have existed for a long time. So if you have to start redesigning these businesses, we've hired the first data scientist, we've hired the first AI engineer, and we've hired the first social scientist. What else do these companies do to take this forward? How do you build that operating system mindset when you're starting off? And conversely, how do you inculcate an operating system mindset in a legacy company, because they can't just shut shop. They have to move on towards move towards this at least at a glacial pace, if not faster. So these are the two questions I want to more or less close with. Yeah. I'll start with Professor Shailesh.
So, see, today's enterprises are both domain rich and data rich, and we are not utilizing this power properly, right? That is the roadmap we need, right? So if I'm running a manufacturing unit or a retail business, I have people who understand different parts of retail. No single person understands the entirety of retail. No single person understands the entirety of any domain, right? So what we do in our workshops is we bring first the different domain experts from each area of, let's say, retail business, right? Procurement guy comes in, supply chain guy comes in, warehouse guy comes in, search engine guy comes in, front end guy, store manager comes in. They are the people who understand the pain points, what I call the nails people, right? They understand the pain points and the use cases. So they'll give me a list of use cases that all that. And I start with what metrics are you trying to optimize? Therefore, what decisions are you taking? Therefore, what is your decision maturity in terms of, is it a rule engine? Is it a gut feeling, or is it data driven? But what is your level of maturity on how you make decisions? What metrics you target? So we understand that. Then we say, tell me about your workflows. First do this, then do that, then do this. So we understand the domain first from all the people who understand, like the 5 blind men, right? Each one understands the elephant differently. That is the nature of our domain guys. They understand the business from different angles. But we have to capture all of that, because the output of one system is an input to another system. And what we do, we say, now let's put together the blueprint of all workflows in retail, of all workflows in healthcare, education, agriculture, whatever. Once we have a workflow design document, which is telling me I need an AI here, an optimization here, a data lookup here, a system of operations here, and this is a workflow. And I have hundreds of workflows that are running a complex ecosystem. Then I take that workflow design document, and then I invite the systems people of the organization and say, look, here is the whole thing. And they look at it and say, oh, face recognition is needed by the security guy and also by the HR. So I need a face recognition module, which is going to be used by both of them. So the systems guy job is to look at the entire blueprint of all workflows and design systems of records, which is a lot more than a data lake. Design a system of intelligence, design a system of operations, and design a system of interaction. All the systems have to be designed, and they produce what I call a system design document. Now, a system design is not a system implementation, it is a design. And like Andy said before, the idea is you need to design APIs first. So you say that an API says a customer ID goes in and top 10 recommended videos or products come out. That is an API. How you do it will evolve over time. So we first solve for interoperability. We first say, let me create an amoeba level organization end to end. An amoeba solves first for interoperability. It does all the 5 things that a life form has to do. And then it takes 1 billion years to evolve into a human. We need to take integration backward approach. First, integrate all your systems, design well, so one system can talk to each other. APIs are designed well. And now you start putting the most rudimentary recommendation engine in that box, the most rudimentary churn prediction engine in that box, but make sure everything runs end to end. So we first solve interoperability. Then we start improving and saying, oh, this recommendation engine can now improve automatically. And we put a system of evolution to make sure that it continuously grows with feedback loop and all. All the models will start improving only after you have integrated. Now, what I learned at Ola and other places was, you take 6 months to build a very beautiful model and you take 6 months to deploy it because the IT system is not built for AI yet. It's built for rule engines and all that. So installing AI in a pre-existing IT system is a very difficult job. But reimagining the whole thing from scratch, redesigning workflows, AI is not a separate thing. It sits within the workflows here and there. Once you understand that, then you say, oh, workflow is the main thing. AI plus data plus IT components are there to run the workflow. And that is the unit I need to work at. Not atoms, but molecules, right? That is the unit I want to work at. And once we have that understanding, we can design beautiful platforms. And this is the framework we can use across all domains. And we would be happy to help out with any of your, these kind of transformations. Yeah, it's a systematic process. It is not something that nobody knows, therefore we also don't know, therefore let's give up. It's not like that. There is a systematic process. Hopefully people get that sense that it is possible and we can do it. Yeah, we've done it in many verticals. We can do it here also in your domains.
Fantastic. Same question to Professor Neely. How do people start? How do the CEOs start first? Whether it's a young company or an old company, how do they start? What do they look at?
Yeah, and there was also a question in the chat about smaller or medium-sized companies with limited resources. I mean, I'm conscious of the time, but I think that I would go back to something I said earlier, and one additional thing. So the first thing is I would think very deliberately about how mature you already are as an organization in terms of AI. And I think those 3 phases of, first of all, just experimenting and understanding the capability of some of the technology is just fundamental. There's no point going on a one-off training course and going, right, I've learned how to do AI, because it is moving so quickly that the only way to learn is to experiment and to play and to talk with other people and so on. So that's the first thing, about building capability. The second thing, I think you then do need some quick wins that you can point to people and say, look, we've managed to automate that process or improve this particular piece, and that starts to build confidence. And then the third thing, I think, is the reimagining the businesses we've just been talking about. And that idea of starting with the end in mind, or starting with the outcome you're trying to deliver, I think is a really good way of framing it. Because when you start to think about the outcome your customer is looking for, or indeed your customer's looking for, often you end up reframing the way you think about the business. So, there's a really famous quote from marketing, which talks about customers not wanting 1/4-inch drills, but wanting 1/4-inch holes. I actually don't. I think that's wrong, because what you have to ask is, why does the customer want the 1/4 inch hole? And if the reason the customer wants the 1/4 inch hole is to put a bit of art on the wall, then there are other ways you can deliver that outcome. You could have a painter paint directly on the wall. You could glue the art to the wall. You could have a data projector shining on the wall. So when you really start to think about outcomes, you redefine the boundaries of your business, and then that makes it easier to reimagine. So I think those 3 phases are important. And then you do get into the systems piece that we were just chatting about. The other bit I would say is, I think it's this has been most successful in my view, where you actually create the team or the space, which is the future thinking team. So there's a real danger in organizations that when you think about change and transformation, that we end up going, we'll stick it on the side of the desk of really busy executives already. That is doomed to fail. And so I think it's, I've seen organizations where they've deliberately appointed a director whose job is to think about and run the team who's thinking about the next generation 2 of our business or generation 3 of our business. And because you have to have some people who are running the machine today and delivering good service to customers and making sure contracts are met and the money's coming in and so on. Otherwise, you have no business. But you need the team that are then reinventing the business to be freed from today's operation, to actually have the time to think and work out how to make that transition. And so I think separating it out quite deliberately is a really important piece for organizations.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, professors. I think we're almost out of time. Last 5 odd minutes, I believe. So I just want to leave us, and you've already answered the questions that was there. And I think, and we got a few more offline as well. But I don't think we have enough time. So let's maybe just take one more question in that, which I thought was very interesting, is, can AI help us create a more resilient business model to withstand economic or market disruption? That, I think, is a really interesting one. If I have to rephrase it, how do you use AI to make yourself future ready or future proof to other disruptions? And I'm not saying a war. You could probably you could save your business from a war, but maybe other market forces is something you can make yourself immune to. Are there any thoughts on this? Let's start with Professor Neely.
So there are already some examples. I mean, Google recently released some information about how they were. So there's lots of discussion we have with the students actually is about how much the energy cost of large language models is, and we have students who say we won't use ChatGPT because it consumes 20 times as much energy as a Google search, and therefore it's bad for the environment. There are others who would say, well, actually, the AI is going to help us come up with new and more efficient ways of running organizations, which actually reduce the energy consumption of them. And that was one of the Google examples around data centers and the amount that they managed to save in the energy consumption in their data centers by using AI to plan and program more efficiently. So I think there are already examples of where AI can help make you more resilient. I think there's a really interesting question about, how would an AI enabled business have coped with the COVID pandemic and the disruption and the shock that came then? Because actually, the boards I was involved in at that point were incredibly nimble. We all switched to meeting on a weekly basis. We were all constantly asking about the health of the staff, about the cash flow, about financial prospects, what was going on, were we reopening businesses, were we in lockdown mode, what the policy was around face coverings. I mean, there were so many different variables, and we were all, the non-executive directors, I think, were particularly valuable because they sat on multiple boards, and so they shared experience really quickly across different boards. In a situation that we've not seen before, if a model is trained on historical data, how good is it at actually helping us in those situations? Now, I like to think if you were in a repeat of a COVID pandemic now, one of the ways I'd be using certainly Gen AI is I might be testing some of my assumptions about things I would do in the organization and then saying to Gen AI, challenge my assumptions, critique me, what am I missing to help me learn faster? So I think you could think about how you would use the tools to help you become to make decisions that are more robust more rapidly. But you'd have to be quite thoughtful about how you did that and which bits the tools were useful for and which they were not useful for.
Fantastic. Professor Kumar?
Yeah, completely agree. I think one more thing. See, the holy grail of intelligence is adaptation. A system that can adapt as things change is an intelligent system, fundamentally, right? And I'll give you an example. So when we were in FICO, we were building the credit models, and suddenly the crash came. Everybody's credit scores shifted as a whole. The whole country's credit scores shifted. We recognized the macro shift and we rebuilt the models. That was manual. But today, what is possible? If you see shifts in the real world is dynamic. Every customer is dynamic. Before marriage, after marriage, their behaviors are different. Economic, macroeconomic is different. Wars causing problems. If you can adapt quickly and the detect change, adapt to change is exactly what AI does. So if you are an AI first company, the lag may be high or low, but it is built for adaptation. So if you are continuously learning from closed feedback loops, if you put that automation in place already, you can rest assured that your system will adapt its models as the macro population behavior changes and all that will happen. So AI first mindset builds a resilient organization that works in a VUCA world. That is the nature of what AI is supposed to do. Like we adapt when the traffic is good or bad, right? We adapt quickly, right?
Right.
Exactly that way AI is supposed to adapt. So AI first organizations are highly adaptive organization by nature. Adaptation becomes autonomous in those organizations. Great. So I think obviously the longer we can predict the future, the better we can be resilient, but that's not possible in the world today. But reasoning systems and other systems are coming up to get there. I just want to do 1 minute quickly address the most important question we have not asked, which is to agentic or not to agentic. That's the question.
Yes, please.
Question. And I think one of the FOMOs that has been created by the hype machinery in the world is that if you're not doing agentic, you're not doing AI. If you're not doing LLM, you're not doing AI. And that's a very big myth. We need to take that with a lot of salt. And you need to really understand when to do agentic. Please put that question in your chat GPT and listen to the answer. One of the most important things it says is, if you know that your workflows are known, if you have known workflows, if you know your workflows, you don't need agent. 99% of the workflows are known, right? How do you book a ticket? How do you deliver a packet? How do you update the profile of a user? Most of the workflows are already known. We don't need agentic. We need agentic when we have to discover a new workflow. And that is 1% of the mature process organization already knows its work. Second, agentic, each component, each stage in the process is going to add one more layer of error, which goes to the next layer, more layer of errors. So the answers you get at the end may not be what we are used to, which is correct, non-hallucinating, deterministic answers. The answers may change for the same prompt because it's a probabilistic system, not a deterministic system. So there are valid use cases of agentic, which are human productivity and all that. But running a complex system is not to be done because somebody does a prompt and says, optimize the network. You don't need that. You have to bake it into your system automatically. 90% of the work we do is not driven by prompts because we are running a complex system. It cannot be driven by prompts, right? It is autonomous intelligence. 1%, 5% work is prompt driven. That is where, like customer care or research or all the known use cases they have published. So be very clear when to agentic, when non to agentic. It comes with a lot of cost. You have to factor that in, like Andy said earlier. And we need to be very judicious and wise about agentic versus not. Don't fall for the FOMO. Now, not everything is agentic.
I'm going to use that as your last words, Professor Kumar. Professor Andy, any last thoughts, parting thoughts?
We could go on. This has been fascinating. We could go on a long time. And on the agentic thing, I agree. Every time you look on LinkedIn or whatever, there's another 78 workflows that people have put, and you think, why have you bothered with that particular one? So I think being really thoughtful about where you deploy this technology, it's incredibly powerful technology, but being thoughtful about where you deploy it and where you really need it is just fundamental.
Amazing. It has been a riveting discussion. I look forward to having the same one with both of you again sometime very, very soon, and a lot more depth. It's been fantastic. And I know in the back end we were getting a lot of questions. I had to stop Bhargav from sending me more. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to kick it back to KG, and have a good day, professors. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.